talking about the American Revolution, War of 1812 timeline, and how the U.S. gained their independence. During the French and Indian War, the British claimed victory, but it proved to be very costly. The British decided to tax the colonists to pay their debt. They imposed taxes such as the Stamp Act and the Declaratory Act. These acts gave way to uprisings such as the Boston Tea Party and the Boston Massacre.
This is the British, and this is the Americans. A street fight turned into a massacre, but not really.
As a result, King George III of Britain passed the Intolerable Acts to end the colonial rebellion.
The First Continental Congress thus convened in 1774 to send a declaration of rights and grievances to the king, but still claim loyalty to the crown.
No taxation without representation. No taxation without representation.
In response, the British sent troops to seize arms and supplies of militias in April 1775. The American Revolution broke out with the shot heard around the world. The Second Continental Congress in 1775 organized an army and sparked the desire for American independence. Thomas Paine's common sense amplified this demand. The Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, was proclaimed on July 4, 1776. The Battle of Saratoga in 1777 was a major turning point because the colonists proved their potential against the British. The French became allies of the colonists. An enemy's enemy is my friend.
The Battle of Yorktown marked the end of the war when the British surrendered. This guaranteed American independence.
The Treaty of Paris of 1783 recognized the U.S. independence. During the American Revolution, the United States planned the Articles of Confederation as their first constitution. Ben Franklin and John Dickinson were the primary contributors of the Articles. The Albany Plan was the first attempt at government unification, but it failed, though it did influence the Articles. The Articles ultimately failed miserably. The document had no central government, no way to enforce laws, no judiciary system, and no common currency. There was just no way for the states to make decisions uniformly. Many delegates advocated for a new constitution. Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison authored the Federalist Papers, rallying support for the Constitution. James Madison is also considered the father of the Constitution and framed the Bill of Rights.
There were three main debates between the delegates at the Constitutional Convention. One issue was the structuring of the legislative branch. Madison drafted the Virginia Plan to have a bicameral legislature and representation proportionate to population. Patterson presented the New Jersey Plan to have a unicameral legislature and equal representation for all states. The Great Compromise was passed to satisfy both parties. It is still in effect today. It stated that there were to be two legislative houses, one based on population and one based on equal representation, in order to appease both large and small states.
Another conflict was about slavery. The North viewed that slaves should not be counted towards population because they were defined as property. The South wanted slaves to count, to give the Southern states more representation in the government. The Three-Fifths Compromise settled this debate by allowing the slaves to be counted as three-fifths of a person for the purpose of population. There is also a debate between the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists.
I'm an anti-federalist, and I think that the Constitution is bad, and I think that the Articles of Confederation are good, and that Bill of Rights is good.
I'm a Federalist, and I like the Constitution because we need a strong central government. I approve this message.
The Constitution was influenced by the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, and the Mayflower Compact. John Locke's philosophy of natural rights, limited government, and separation of powers also contributed greatly.
The Constitution was approved by 9 states in 1788 and began its implementation in 1789. There was also a promise of adding the Bill of Rights.
I like Justin Bieber, and I can say it. Pew, pew, pew.
Plaintiff, defendant, judge freedom, and the jury.
Now for the War of 1812!
The U.S. placed a trade embargo on Britain in response to British seizure of American ships.
This ultimately hurt the Americans, however, and was repealed. Because the Embargo Act of 1807 created economic turmoil in the States, the U.S. wanted to expand into British Canada, believing that more land would end the Depression. The British began to rally northern Native Americans against U.S. expansion. The British supplied Native Americans with weapons for insurrection against the U.S.
Tecumseh and his brother, the Prophet, were key figures in the unification of American tribes and reminded them to embrace their heritage.
During the war, the U.S. military was poorly trained and was no match for the British. Their failed attempt to seize Canada forced them to fight a defensive war.
The Battle of Thames was a turning point for the U.S. Not only was it a victory, but Tecumseh's death ended Native American resistance.
In August 1814, the British invaded Washington, D.C. and burned the Capitol and other government buildings. Madison utilized this incident and boosted American nationalism.
The War of 1812 finally came to a close, not because any one side was prevailing, but because Napoleon's surrender influenced the British to focus on European affairs. In December 1814, the Treaty of Ghent was signed, changing absolutely nothing.
The Battle of New Orleans, however, made Americans feel as though they emerged from the war victorious, even though the Battle of New Orleans was fought after the Treaty of Ghent was signed.
Because of trade interruption, the U.S. was forced to begin manufacturing its own goods, boosting the American economy.
Peace in Europe left America to concentrate on territory expansion, particularly after the defeat of Native Americans. The war also increased American nationalism. Thank you for watching this episode of Crash Course. See you later.